called CT. Today's nugget of wisdom.
Why I laugh and why I smile is for a very simple reason. That today's nugget of wisdom is something that most people would not consider a nugget of wisdom, but it actually says something very simple, that anyone who has watched the dance of a millipede and considers this important has not seen the dance of a snake.
Wow, do you wanna elaborate that a little bit?
I will, but what makes it interesting is I state it, then I keep quiet, and then I leave you wondering. It's a tool called suspense.
And then let it
works.
It
It works.
So somewhere along the way, I will talk about it a little more and expand a little more. And towards the end of the show, I will explain it. And I'll also tell you its origin.
All right. Sounds good to me.
This is to keep you tuned in.
This is okay. No, it sounds good to me, and it definitely, evokes interest on my part, because a millipede and a snake, how they dance is an interesting thing. But still looking at what's making headlines, an interesting story which I think was doing rounds on social media yesterday is one of a young man whose gift has definitely, put him on an international spotlight. And this is a young man who drew Steve Harvey, and out of social media, and just shows you the power of social media, he managed to reach out to Steve Harvey, and apparently he has even invited him to Kenya.
This is true.
Yeah, so whether he's going to honor the invite or not, what we do know is that Steve Harvey, of course, has loved his piece of art and has requested to meet him. He wanted to meet him in Johannesburg, but according to the young man, he's like, no, I'm actually not too far from Joburg. And of course, I'm
in Kenya.
Africa is, just literally, we're streets away.
4 hours away.
4 hours away. So if you're coming to Joburg, why not just drop into Kenya and, come pick your, piece of art?
Portrait, yes.
Your portrait.
It's interesting because once he responded, he said, well, I'm going to Johannesburg and I'll be in Botswana, so maybe we can link up.
I don't know if you've ever had to travel and somebody asks you, oh, are you going to New York? I have a friend in New York. And, somebody kind of thinks sometimes it's
I know a Kenyan in New York.
Yeah, I know a Kenyan in New York. Do you think you could reach out to them?
Mike, you're being specific. You just need to mention the U.S.
Oh, yes.
And someone says, oh, U.S. Okay.
Oh, I have a friend in the U.S.
In fact, and you ask where, I said, no, somewhere in the U.S. And it's called so-and-so. So when you get there, just ask. Say, hey.
So it looks like Steve Harvey had the same thing. It's like, oh, this guy's in Kenya. You know what? I'll be in Botswana and Johannesburg. So, hey, why don't you just, take a bus ride and, come down and let's hook up and I take my piece of art.
But you do know that in the West, where the entire continent is referred to as one country. Oh, you come from Africa. You say... Yes, but it's a little more complex than
that.
Oh, yeah, and they'll ask you something like, do you all speak Swahili in Africa? Or do you speak African?
Do you speak African? That's the thing. That one, I think...
these questions, if you don't pause and think about it, they actually are very illuminating, because it points to the understanding that individual has of your continent and where you come from. And remember also...
Or in this case, lack of.
Yes, but also where they come from, it's the U.S., and then you have these states, but you come from the U.S.
The
first.
U.S.
Right.
Now, remember that very many people have knowledge, not just of the state they come from, but probably of the region or the town. They're so self-sufficient that they have no need or interest
to step out.
to know what else happens in the rest of that particular state. Now, we, on the other hand, have open minds, one, because of our education, but also we have this need to look for greener
pastures.
Yes. So we keep an extremely open mind. Yes.
Right.
Now, and our education system opens that mind because you know about other parts of the world because you're taught in school.
And I wonder if that has a part it plays in terms of not finding opportunities, because when your mind is so fixed on looking for opportunities elsewhere, you cease to look at the ones near you.
Unfortunately, if you look at the opportunities that present themselves to us, they also present themselves with a little caveat. It's called complication. Who do you know?
Who do you know?
And who can, of course,
yes, and where do you
can hook you up.
Right.
Yes.
But is that always the case? We do have cases of people who've actually made it within their environment without necessarily knowing somebody, where they've, applied the ethos of hard work.
It, for the longest time, that really worked. And it was the norm. But unfortunately, it isn't always the norm. And if you come from a community that is considered perhaps not marginalized, but marginal in terms of numbers, then the the narrative and the sentiment that is felt is that you will not be prioritized. Now, this is to put it as politely as I possibly
As you
can.
possibly
Oh,
can.
yes, that is true. And even if we look at our culture, sometimes that does happen depending on whether you're firstborn or lastborn. Your priorities may be different. Whether you're male or female, your priorities may be different. So, of course, even societally, you'll find that if you don't come from the right community or the right, lineage, then unfortunately you're disenfranchised.
Of course.
Even within a community that perhaps is born together by linguistic similarities, you'll find again, as you say correctly, if your family name doesn't resonate with something that people consider to be favorable, you are already disadvantaged.
Yeah.
So now these are the norms, but when they take center stage, then people feel that going to a place where that doesn't matter may provide a better option for them. Yes.
True.
Oh, of course. Then you can be, one of the many fish in the sea, and you all have opportunity, at the same time.
And your
or on
ability
the same
is
place.
what will stand you in good stead.
And in this case, it's not. It's merit, really, that will position you as opposed to whom you know. Speaking of whom you know, court blocks the arrest of the KQ whistleblower and orders his reinstatement, which, as I see already, might be throwing him back into shark waters. A court has stopped the authorities from arresting or prosecuting a security chief at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, accused of filming and sharing a video of a Chinese airline that landed last week with 239 passengers. Justice Weldon Korir also ordered Kenya Airways to reinstate Mr. Gire Ali, who had been suspended for recording the video of China Southern Airline on Wednesday last week, leading to a public uproar. He made the orders yesterday after Ali, an assistant security agent, moved to court complaining that he was being targeted. So now they've stopped anyone from arresting or prosecuting him, and if they've also said he must be reinstated, essentially he must go back to work.
What was he being prosecuted for in the first place?
Well, this was the thing that he took. First of all, the charges that were brought, taking video at the airport, he was not authorized to do so.
It's a restricted area.
It's a restricted area.
And
first
this
of all,
is not permissible.
Exactly.
Okay. One.
Secondly, without then the authorities of his direct employer, which is KQ, Kenya Airways, at this point, and then sharing this information, which quote unquote he had gotten illegally, and then sharing the information to the wider public, which then put the wider public in a state of uproar and panic. In terms of 239 passengers off this plane. Essentially, what does that mean? The state or the nation would not have gone into panic had he not shared this video. This is what KQ is contending. And of course, they seem to be keen on punishing the applicant for exposing the nation a threat to their lives, while there was a directive from the same officers suspending aircrafts from China. This, of course, is the statement that kind of just clicks everything together. And so now the High Court says, number one, you must reinstate him. You will not prosecute him. And he can go back to work. But like I said, he's going back into shark-infested waters in this case, because how is that?
Yeah, that is a court order, and hopefully it's going to be obeyed. But of course, practically, how do you go back to work?
How is he going to go back and do his job?
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of imagine that he'll be a hero to some. But of course, there are those who feel that he exposed them, and as a result, must be, face some punitive action.
Do you remember a time when a certain gentleman by the name of John Githongo exposed certain malpractices within the government of Kenya?
And he asked people to go through.
Yes.
Go through.
Yeah, you would assume that this was a good thing.
Right.
Okay. How was he treated?
Pariah. Persona non grata, of course.
So you ask yourself, wait. This is his job.
He was helping us.
This is what he's supposed to do. So did we give him this job so that he wouldn't do it? And when he does do his job, then why do we demonize him? Oh, that man was demonized. So remember, again, in this very studio, we have said that one of the things that Kenyans do well in is being duplicitous. On the one hand, you say that you would like change and you are anti certain negative things within the society, but your actions speak otherwise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what they say? They say that if you want to kill a dog, give it a bad name. So, with your nuggets of wisdom, so maybe you might want to explain that at the end. And it looks like for him, he's already being given a bad name. So God knows what will happen, in the end of that. He might lose his job. Or even if he doesn't lose his job by being fired, the environment can be such that it's so hostile that you cannot work. You cannot deliver.
Mike, whistleblowers, we are told, are protected in this country. I will take the view that indeed they may be protected, because I don't know much about the protection that involves whistleblowers. But what has been in the public domain, whistleblowing in this country is dangerous to your health.
Very dangerous. Might actually be worse than coronavirus for him.
For him.
There you go.
The interesting part about this is, though, he seems to have the support of the nation behind him, is that people wanted to know what was really going on, and he was able to expose this. So, I mean, if you just look at social media and what happened immediately, he posted the letter of his suspension. Social media was ablaze, and people were asking questions in terms of how could they do this, when essentially what he was doing is protecting people by exposing this. So it'd be interesting to see how all of that turns out.
And
we're going to take a look at the traffic and see what's happening on our roads this morning. We come back and discuss. This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. We're looking at what's going on in the papers and what's happening in the country and, of course, around the world. We'll take a look at traffic and come back and continue with this discussion.